For 3 years, she braced herself at every checkpoint. Every TSA line, the same outcome. Pulled aside, questioned, dismissed. She dressed plainly, arrived early, kept her documents perfect. None of it mattered. Then a Korean Mafia boss in a tailored suit watched it happen one more time and made a single phone call that shook an entire airport. Kang Dae was untouchable. The kind of man airports rearrange themselves around. Korean criminal empire, global reach, a reputation that moved faster than he did. Private terminals, officials who waved him through without looking up. A world that had collectively decided, without being asked, that this man was not to be questioned, not to be delayed, not to be inconvenienced. He had seen cruelty before, had ordered it, had built his empire on the understanding that power determined outcomes and everything else was noise. But then he saw Rochelle. She was standing at gate B12, passport in one hand, her daughter's hand in the other. Documents clean, record spotless, flight boarding. And for the third time in the same morning, the same agent was pointing her towards secondary screening. Not because anything was wrong, but because he had decided she looked like something was. Lila was 6 years old, too young to understand the system, old enough to feel it. She pressed closer to her mother and watched the adults with eyes that already knew, even at 6, that something deeply unfair was happening. Rochelle didn't cry. She pressed her lips together, lifted her chin, and stayed composed for Lila. But her hands were shaking. Kang Dae stopped walking. He is not the kind of man who intervenes. He is not the kind of man who feels. 3 years ago, grief stripped everything soft from him and left only control. He had not done a single thing since his wife died that she would have recognized. Until now. He took out his phone. He made one call. What happened in the next 8 minutes and everything that unfolded after will stay with you long after this story ends. Kang Dae moved through Incheon the way powerful men always move, like the space belonged to him before he arrived. Staff found reasons to look elsewhere. Security eyes tracked him, then slid away. The terminal adjusted itself around his presence the way water moves around stone. Not because anyone told it to, but because something in the air made the choice obvious. He wore a black tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, a slim black tie. No luggage he carried himself. No explanations he offered anyone. His phone was in his left hand, his watch caught the terminal light, and the people around him, business travelers, families, airport staff, made small unconscious corrections to their paths without knowing why. This was simply how the world had always worked for Kang Dae. The boarding agent at gate 31 greeted him before he reached the counter. His passport was returned faster than it was taken. A supervisor appeared from somewhere to ensure the process moved without friction. No one asked questions. No one ever did. There was a version of Kang Dae, buried deep enough now that he rarely remembered it existed, who had found this uncomfortable. A younger man who had grown up in a cramped apartment in Mapogu, whose mother worked double shifts and still apologized for things that were never her fault. That man had understood what it meant to be looked through instead of looked at, had understood the particular exhaustion of existing in spaces that were not built with you in mind. That man had loved Jian. She had been the one who kept him tethered to something resembling a conscience. Not through argument, she rarely argued, but through the simple, relentless way she moved through the world. Quietly generous, stubbornly decent. She noticed people the way Kang Dae noticed exits and angles. She saw them. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand in his sold penthouse. He had not moved them in 3 years. He did not examine why. The flight to Los Angeles was 14 hours. He slept for 4, worked for 9, and spent the final hour watching clouds dissolve beneath the wing and thinking about nothing, which was the closest he could get to peace anymore. LAX received him the way every airport did. His contact had arranged the fast-track clearance. Customs took 4 minutes. His car was meant to collect him in 2 hours, a scheduling gap his assistant had flagged and apologized for 3 times. 2 hours. Kongdae stood at the edge of the arrivals hall and looked at his watch. He had calls he could make. He had reports he could read. He had an empire that generated problems faster than solutions and demanded his attention at every hour of every day. He had never in recent memory simply stood somewhere with time he had not filled. He picked up his carry-on and walked toward the departure's terminal, not toward anything specific, just walking. He did not yet know what was waiting at gate B12. Rochelle had a system. She had developed it over years of trial and error, the way you develop any survival skill, through enough failures that eventually the pattern became clear. Arrive 2 hours early, minimum. Dress in neutral colors, nothing that reads as statement or attitude. Hair neat. Documents out before you reach the counter. Move without hesitation. Answer questions before they finish asking them. Do not sigh. Do not cross your arms. Do not let your face do anything that could be interpreted as difficult. It was exhausting. She had never said that out loud to anyone except her mother. She wore her gray cardigan today, the one that said nothing about her. Lila walked beside her in her dark hoodie, braids tight and neat, small rolling bag bumping along the terminal floor. In Rochelle's carry-on, 2 labeled Ziploc bags of snacks, Lila's coloring book, a change of clothes for each of them, and tucked carefully between her journal and a folded boarding pass, a birthday card with a yellow envelope. Happy 70th, Mama. She had picked it out 3 weeks ago. She was not going to miss this birthday. She had promised. Are we almost there? Lila asked. Almost. Will Grandma Ruth be at the airport? Uncle Deshaun is picking us up. Will he have the sign? Rochelle smiled despite herself. He'll have the sign. Lila seemed satisfied with this. She skipped once, twice, then remembered she was pulling a bag and settled back into walking. Rochelle watched her and felt the particular fullness that children produce without trying. The way they could make ordinary moments feel like something worth protecting. Gate B12 was quiet when they arrived. Rochelle checked the board. On time. Boarding in 40 minutes. She found 2 seats near the window, got Lila settled with her coloring book, and allowed herself one slow breath. That was when Agent Greer appeared. She noticed him the way she had learned to notice certain things, peripherally, without looking directly, reading the body language before the words came. He was moving with purpose toward the gate desk, speaking to the agent there, and then his eyes moved across the seating area and stopped. On her. Rochelle kept her face still. He walked over. Mid-40s. Badge clipped to his belt. Expression that had learned to perform neutrality while meaning something else entirely. Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass and ID. She had them ready. Of course she did. She always had them ready. He studied both longer than they required studying. Then, I'm going to need you to come with me for additional screening. Lila looked up from her coloring book. Is there a specific concern? Rochelle asked. Her voice was level. She had practiced level. Standard procedure, he said, which was not an answer. She took Lila's hand and followed him, because what else did you do? The first screening took 11 minutes. They checked her bag, swabbed her hands, asked her where she was traveling and why and who she was visiting and how long she planned to stay. She answered everything. Her passport was valid. Her boarding pass scanned clean. Her record was, and had always been, spotless. They let her go. She walked back to the gate, settled Lila back into the chair, and did not say anything about what had happened because Lila was 6, and this was not a conversation for 6. 7 minutes later, Greer came back. Ma'am, once more, please. Rochelle stood without speaking, took Lila's hand, followed. The second screening found nothing because there was nothing to find. Different questions this time, same circular logic. She answered them all. Her voice stayed even. Her face stayed neutral. Inside, something was pulling tighter and tighter, the way a rope pulls when it has been stretched past what it was designed to hold. They let her go again. She walked back to the gate. Boarding had started. The line was moving. She gathered their bags, took Lila's hand, and joined the queue. Greer materialized at her elbow like he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Ma'am. His voice was almost apologetic now, which was somehow worse. One more time. Lila's hand tightened around hers, small fingers pressing in, holding on. Rochelle looked down and saw her daughter watching Greer with wide, careful eyes. The eyes of a child trying to understand something that the adults around her had decided not to explain. The line continued moving. Other passengers glanced over and then found somewhere else to look. One woman's eyes held Rochelle's for a half second, something like recognition in them, or guilt. And then she was looking at her boarding pass, at the floor, at anything else. Rochelle pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She was not going to raise her voice. She was not going to give him anything he could use, or anything Lila would have to carry. She was going to stay composed because Lila was watching, and because she had always been the one who stayed composed. She had just taken the first step towards secondary screening for the third time when she heard footsteps behind her stop. Not slow down. Stop. She did not turn around. But someone had noticed. Someone had stopped walking in a busy airport terminal in the middle of a Thursday morning and stood completely still and was watching. Kongdae had seen a great many things in his life that he had chosen not to interfere with. This was not going to be one of them. He told himself he was just watching. That was what he did, observed, assessed, calculated. It was how he had survived long enough to build what he had built. You watched situations before you entered them. You never moved on feeling. Feeling was how people made mistakes that couldn't be undone. But something was happening inside him that had nothing to do with calculation. He watched the woman walk towards secondary screening for the third time. Her daughter's hand in hers, her spine straight, her face composed in a way that cost her something. He could see exactly what it cost her, and a memory arrived without permission, the way the most inconvenient memories always did. Jian, 3 years ago, a subway station in Mapo on a Tuesday evening in November. Rain coming down sideways, the kind that made the city look like it was dissolving. They had been walking to dinner. He had an umbrella. She had forgotten hers. A woman at the station entrance was soaked through. A stranger, middle-aged, standing under an overhang that wasn't doing much, looking at the rain with the resigned expression of someone who had accepted that this was simply what the rest of their evening was going to be. Jian had walked over and handed her their umbrella. Just like that. Without discussion. Kongdae had stared. "We only have one," he said. Jian had looked back at him with that particular expression she reserved for moments when she found him genuinely baffling. "It's raining and she doesn't have one," she said. That's enough reason. They had dinner soaking wet. She had laughed the entire way there. He had not thought about that evening in over a year. He did not know why it arrived now. In an LAX terminal, watching a stranger be humiliated in front of her child for the third time in one morning. He knew exactly why it arrived now. He took out his phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. He spoke quietly, precisely, in a register he rarely used in public. Not the sharp command voice, not the boardroom cadence, but the very still, very calm tone that the people who worked for him had learned meant something specific. It meant that whatever he was saying was not a request. It was not a suggestion, and there would be no second conversation about it. He made 2 more calls after the first, each shorter than the last. Then he stood and watched. It took 8 minutes. He counted. First, a terminal supervisor appeared from a door beside the screening area. Not Greer's supervisor. Someone above that. Then 2 airport officials moved toward Greer with the brisk, purposeful energy of people who had been told to resolve something immediately. There was a brief exchange. Greer's expression cycled through confusion, then protest, then something that recognized it was over. He was escorted away from the gate. A senior official in a navy blazer walked toward Rochelle with the careful body language of someone carrying an apology they knew was insufficient. Kongdae watched him speak to her, watched her face, still composed, still controlled, but something shifting underneath it, something that didn't know what to do with this. Watched Lila look up at the official and then look around the terminal, searching for the shape of what had changed. Kangdae pocketed his phone and picked up his bag. That's enough reason. Rochelle sat at the gate with Lila pressed against her side and tried to locate what she was feeling. Relieved, yes. The flight was being held. They were going to make it. Grandma Ruth's birthday was still happening. Uncle Deshaun was still coming with his sign, and Lila was going to see her grandmother turn 70, and that was what mattered. But underneath the relief was something harder to name. Something that sat in her chest like a stone. It had taken, what? Someone with enough power to make a phone call. That was the threshold. 3 screenings, documents perfect, record clean. Her daughter watching every second of it. And the thing that finally stopped it was a man in an expensive suit deciding to pick up his phone. She pressed her lips together and said nothing because Lila was right there and this was still not a conversation for 6. Mama, Lila said. That man on the phone. Lila was pointing unself-consciously, the way children point without strategy. He was looking at you the whole time. Rochelle followed her daughter's finger and found nothing. Just the boarding queue beginning to form, passengers gathering their bags. What man, baby? The tall one, in the black suit. Lila said it simply, factually, the way she reported everything. He made a call, and then those people came, and then that other man left. I watched him do it. Rochelle went still. On the jetway. Lila tugged her sleeve and pointed again. Toward the back of the queue. Rochelle turned. He was already looking away. Tall. Black suit. Phone in his left hand. The kind of stillness that wasn't stillness at all, but control so complete it resembled it. He was 2 rows back, facing forward, giving every indication that he had not just rearranged the last 8 minutes of her life with a series of quiet phone calls. Rochelle looked at him for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she turned back and walked down the jetway with her daughter. She chose the window seat and put Lila on the aisle, which she always did. Lila liked to see people walking past, like the small theater of a full flight settling in. The seat across the aisle and 1 row back was occupied by the time she looked up. Black suit, quiet face, eyes already somewhere else, or performing somewhere else convincingly enough that it amounted to the same thing. He had a phone in his hand, and he was reading something on it with the focused attention of a man who had decided the conversation was not happening. Rochelle turned to her window. Fine. The flight attendant completed her safety demonstration. The engines deepened. Los Angeles fell away beneath them in a grid of light and freeway. And Lila pressed her nose to the gap between the seats and watched the city shrink with the unguarded wonder of someone for whom the world was still mostly new. They were somewhere over Nevada when it happened. Lila unbuckled her seatbelt. Rochelle caught her arm automatically, and she held up 1 small finger in a gesture that meant 1 second. Mama, I know what I'm doing, and leaned across the aisle. Excuse me, she said. Kangdae looked up from his phone. Lila regarded him with the direct, undeflected seriousness of a 6-year-old who had decided something and was seeing it through. Thank you for helping my mom, she said. She doesn't know I saw, but I saw. So, thank you. The phone stayed in his hand. He did not speak for a moment that lasted slightly longer than comfortable. He had answers for everything. He had been in rooms with prosecutors and rivals and men who wanted him afraid, and he had never once been without something to say. He had nothing for this. He nodded. Once. Carefully. Lila, satisfied, pulled herself back into her seat and rebuckled with the focused concentration of someone completing an important task. Rochelle had turned from her window. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But for the first time since the terminal, they were actually looking at each other, not past each other, not performing indifference, just 2 people at altitude with nothing between them, but thin recycled air and the particular silence of something that had no name yet. She turned back to her window first. He returned D to his phone. Neither of them slept for the rest of the flight. The mechanical issue was minor. The delay was 2 hours, and the Atlanta terminal on a Thursday afternoon had nothing to offer except overpriced coffee and the particular restless energy of people who had somewhere to be and were not getting there yet. Rochelle had found a coffee stand near gate C9. Lila was asleep across two chairs with her head on Rochelle's cardigan, which was folded into something approximating a pillow. The birthday visit was over. Grandma Ruth had cried when they walked in. Uncle Deshaun had brought the sign. It had been exactly what it was supposed to be, and Rochelle was still carrying the warmth of it even now. Even tired, even delayed. She looked up when he approached the counter. Black suit. No tie today. That was the only difference. He ordered black coffee without looking at the menu, turned to find somewhere to sit, and found the terminal substantially full. Their eyes met in the way eyes meet when there is no longer any reasonable way to perform not seeing each other. She moved her bag from the seat across from her. He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke, which felt honest rather than uncomfortable. Two people deciding simultaneously that they were too tired for the kind of conversation that required pretending. Your daughter, he said finally. She's well. She loved every minute of it. Rochelle wrapped both hands around her cup. My mother turned 70 once. She would have been devastated to miss it. He nodded. The umbrella, Rochelle said. She hadn't planned to say it. Lila told me what she saw. That you made calls. I didn't get the chance to say anything on the flight. Something moved across his face. Not discomfort. Something more careful than that. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. She looked at him directly. I wanted to. He accepted this without deflecting it, which she hadn't expected. They talk the way you talk when you've been stripped of the usual social scaffolding. No shared context, no mutual friends, no reason to manage impressions. Just two people in a terminal with 2 hours and nothing to protect. He told her about Ji-Yun. Not how she died, just how she lived. The umbrella on the subway platform in November. The way she noticed people that others had decided weren't worth noticing. How she made decency look effortless in a way that had always slightly baffled him. Because nothing in his world was effortless. Everything cost something, and she seemed to operate outside that economy entirely. She sounds like she was extraordinary, Rochelle said quietly. She was ordinary, he said. That was the extraordinary part. Rochelle looked at her coffee for a moment. Then she told him about Jerome. The deployment. The phone call she had been dreading for 2 years that came on a Wednesday morning in March, while Lila was eating cereal and a cartoon was playing in the background. The flag folded into a triangle, handed to her by a man in dress uniform who said on behalf of a grateful nation, and meant it and still couldn't give her back the thing she needed. The way Lila, even now, sometimes set a place at the table for him without saying anything about it. Just said it, as if keeping the habit kept something alive. Kangdae listened the way people rarely listen, without preparing his response, without finding the parallel to his own experience. Just listening. I built a system, Rochelle said, for airports. For getting through without, she stopped. Started again. I got so good at not reacting that I forgot I was allowed to. I built an empire, he said. For the same reason. She looked at him. Control, he said simply. When the thing you couldn't control happened, you find the things you can. They sat with that for a moment. The departure board updated above them. Another 40 minutes. Lila shifted in her sleep, pulling the cardigan tighter, and Rochelle watched her and felt the familiar fullness, the thing that made all of it survivable. We're not so different, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. We're not. 2 weeks after Atlanta. Kangdae sat at his desk in Seoul and opened a file his people had compiled without being told exactly what it was for. They were thorough because he required thoroughness. What they had produced was airtight, 14 months of records. Screening logs, flight manifests, incident reports, cross-referenced and annotated. A pattern so clear and so consistent that it was almost administrative in its cruelty. Not the work of one bad morning, but a practice. Greer had been doing this for over a year. Different airports, same profile, same outcome, same immunity from consequence, because no one with enough leverage had ever decided to look. Kangdae had spent his life leveraging things for his own interests. He understood precisely how that machinery worked, and precisely how to introduce something into it that couldn't be ignored. He contacted the TSA's Office of Civil Rights through a layer of attorneys who knew how to file things that stuck. The documentation was submitted completely, sourced impeccably, impossible to dismiss. He did not attach his name to it in any way that would appear in a report. He did not tell Rochelle. He did not tell anyone. He had not done it for credit. He had done it because Jiyeon would have found a way to do it, quietly, without announcement, simply because a pattern like that existed in the world, and she would not have been able to leave it alone once she knew. He was not Jiyeon. He had never been capable of her particular brand of effortless goodness, but he was learning, slowly, to do the thing instead of only recognizing it needed doing. The investigation was opened within the week. Greer was suspended pending review. Kangdae closed the file, put his phone face down on the desk, and went back to work. 6 weeks after Atlanta, Rochelle packed for a long weekend. Just 3 days, a friend's wedding in Nashville. Lila as the self-appointed flower girl who had been practicing her walk since the invitation arrived. The airport was the same airport. The same fluorescent light, the same carpet pattern, the same queue for security that she had navigated more times than she could count. She had the labeled Ziploc bags. She had the documents ready before she reached the counter. Some habits were structural now, built deep enough that they didn't require thought. But she was not bracing. She noticed that halfway through the security line, the difference between a body waiting for something bad and a body simply moving through a space. She was just moving. Lila was beside her, small rolling bag bumping along, narrating something about the wedding flowers at a volume that suggested she had forgotten they were in public. The line moved cleanly through. On the other side, gathering her bag from the conveyor, Lila looked up at her with the frank satisfaction of someone confirming a hypothesis. "See, Mama? It was okay. It was okay," Rochelle said, and meant it. They found their gate with time to spare. Lila established herself in a window seat with her coloring book and a level of territorial confidence that Rochelle chose to admire rather than correct. Outside, a plane pushed back from the gate in the gray morning light. Lila looked up from her coloring. "Mama, that man at the airport, the one who helped us," she said it the way she said most things, directly, without preamble, having decided it was time for this conversation. "Why did he do it?" Rochelle considered the honest answer. "He did it," she said slowly, "because someone he loved used to do things like that. And I think he was trying to remember who he was." Lila absorbed this with a serious concentration. She gave things that mattered. "Then, did it work?" Rochelle looked out at the tarmac, at the gray sky beginning to lighten at the edges, at the plane moving slowly toward the runway with somewhere to be. "I think it's working," she said. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down, a name she had not saved but recognized immediately. 4 words. "Safe flight. Kangdae." She read it once. Read it again. Then she smiled, not the composed, careful smile she wore in terminals, but the real one, the one that surprised her by arriving. She put the phone in her bag. She took Lila's hand. They walked toward the gate.